The rhythm of healing, the octaves method. O is for observation, through stillness we find meditation and breath work that quiet the mind. In silence we listen, the answers are clear, awareness emerges, dissolving the fear. C is for compassion, for self and for all, embracing the good, the struggles, the fall. With kindness we grow, we nurture, we mend, learning to love ourselves as we extend. T is for therapy, a path we explore. Daily we practice unlocking the door. From journaling to mindfulness, healing begins. Each step is a victory as peace settles in. A is for animals and laughter so bright, like children at a play, their joy taking flight. With playfulness and movement, we rediscover the way to heal through the fun that we often delay. V is for victuals, nourishing and pure, detoxifying the body and keeping us sure. We choose what we eat with intention and grace, fueling our journey at our own pace. E is for exercise, where movement is free. We stretch and we bend in sweet harmony. Flexibility grows with choices we make. In strength and in stillness, our bodies awake. S is for socialize, where self-growth begins. Others reflect our triggers and the places within. Through relationships, our true selves we find, growing and healing with each tie that binds. The octaves method, where all behavior makes sense. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 5 of the Trauma and Social Work Podcast. I am KJ Alexander here with my co-host, Tonya Octave, and today we have a lot of important information to dive into. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and let Tonya tell a little bit more about herself and what this podcast is about.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tonya Octave, and we are going into Season 5 of Trauma and Social Work Podcasts, where we will be discussing and diving deep into my book called Heal the Mind, 7 Strategies Towards Mental Wellness, Happiness, and Success, Exploring Trauma, Mental Wellness, and Ways to Live a More Balanced Life. And before we begin, just a simple reminder that this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended for medical, psychological, mental health, or legal advice. Although I'm a licensed professional, this is not a formal type of treatment. We may talk about things like hypnosis and meditation and things that we would do in a therapeutic, from a therapeutic perspective, but it's not a form of treatment. For individual questions about your wellness, your happiness, and your success, please seek out a professional. And if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, do call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.
Great, awesome. That was amazing. So with that being said, I want to make sure I tell the audience, if you haven't already, follow this page on Spotify, YouTube, and any other platforms we post episodes on. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming episodes in the future. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. This is the Trauma and Social Work Podcast. My name is KJ Alexander, and I'm joined with my co-host once again, Tonya Octave. So glad to be here. We have a lot to get into on today's episode, and we want to pick up where we left off last episode and continue our discussion of the book Heal Thy Mind. And we want to take a deep dive into, negative self-talk, which is something that a lot of people probably have had in their own personal life at some point. So I'll read the passage from the book. Another pattern that can repeat itself and cause damage is negative self-talk. If controlled, negative self-talk can be managed. Controlling negative self-talk means identifying statements or thoughts that bring you down, acknowledging them, and retraining for a positive mindset. For example, you can ask yourself, if I am a compassionate person, how can I nourish that character? Or, how do I love and adore myself? There are helpful techniques, and with practice, will move one from the emotions and sensations of experiencing abandonment to understand other ways to be rather than throwing a temper tantrum. And I think that was very interesting to point out because there are so many adults who still throw temper tantrums when they get angry or upset, just like children. So I wonder if you can kind of do a deep dive and discuss more practical ways. So when a person does have these negative thoughts and they start to tell themselves things that may or may not be true about themselves, what strategies can a person use to kind of challenge these thoughts while also honoring who they are as a person and their genuine feelings? So, for an example, a person may feel like they haven't completed a task that they would like to complete, maybe a work task or something, school related. And they feel like because they haven't completed this task, their worth is less, or something external makes them feel like their worth as a person is a lot less. So how would someone go about kind of navigating around those negative self-talks?
You really kind of hinted to it at the beginning, and that is acknowledging that there's an emotion associated with the experience that you're having. So maybe just even saying like, "Oh, I'm angry right now. Oh, irritation is showing up right now. Oh, I am just not very patient." So maybe learning to identify it, because that may do a couple of things for you. It kind of adds some space, some separation between you and the experience you're having by having some cognitive processing going on. And that is identifying the emotion. And it's saying that it's valid and it's true. Another thing is, once you've identified like how you're feeling in terms of the emotion, how can you reframe it? That's one of the big things with negative self-talk, is that we either learn this from our environment, like our parents and the people that we're around as we're growing up. We learn how to think in this way, because maybe it was done to us, and so maybe we absorb some of that negative self-talk. So there's a couple of theories in terms of that. But how do you reframe it? How do you go from something that's negative and move it to something positive? I kind of think of it like, um, we talk about food, or I'll talk about food and how we need to bring food into the body that's alkaline. I also talk about it in terms of thoughts. Are the thoughts that we're having, is it alkaline to our system? So, for example, one of the emotions that resides in the heart would be anger. And so
Okay.
when anger is arising, if it is untreated, it kind of makes sense why some people might get heart attacks, because they have this unresolved anger that's residing right there in the heart area, which does a lot of things in terms of stopping the flow of blood. And some of this is kind of related to Chinese medicine in terms of how emotions are stored in our body. And
Hmm.
so if we are saying, I hate, I hate, I hate, and we are storing that in our body, we are causing these blockages to occur. How can we reframe that to, or from I hate to I love?
Mm.
Right? And so it requires some flexibility with thoughts. It requires some openness. It requires doing some different way of showing up differently. I'll call them like experiments with yourself. And it requires you to be open to trying some of these things, because what typically is happening is life isn't getting better for people because they are in the same patterns. They're thinking the same way, and they don't want, it's very uncomfortable, unfamiliar, it's unknown to get out of these kind of ways that we show up in the world. And so moving from thinking negative to transforming that into something positive. Another idea might be is to look for evidence. So I am very angry at my neighbor because they cannot control their kids. So let's say that is a thought that I'm harboring within myself, and I'm storing it in my body, particularly in my heart region, which is impacting the flow of blood. It may impact how I show up in other situations and things like that. So how can I look for evidence that discredits that? Some people will do things everybody's bad. This happens to me all of the time. I never get the promotion. It's all of these kind of extreme ways of thinking, like black and white. There's no gray area. Everyone's always out to get me. So maybe looking for evidence that will contradict that. So the example I gave earlier with the neighbors is maybe instead of looking at the neighbors who are not caring for their kids, look at all of the rest of the neighbors who are caring for their kids, who are embracing that relationship. And so my attention moves from focusing on all the kids making all the sounds and noises outside. With that thought, it moves to focusing on all of the peace that I'm given when kids are at home and their parents are raising them in their house and they're having fun playing board games and things like that. How you can just transform your life. And a lot of this does involve some mindfulness, some patience, and really kind of being open and receptive to these new ideas. I'm curious, do you ever have a thought that you kind of know that maybe sends you down a path that maybe not positive, maybe goes in a little negative thing that comes up for you? And we'll think about how to reframe that.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think that we're all a little critical of ourselves at times, but I'm not typically a person who tends to focus on negative more than positive. So, I mean, I would say that when it comes to, my content and what I put out on the internet for my podcast, whether it be, for promotional purposes or whatever the case may be, I am pretty critical. Like, I do monitor my analytics, although it may not be where I want it to be right now. I do believe that just being consistent and going with the right amount of effort will pay out over the long term. But I don't really have a negative self-talk when it comes to that per se, because I just believe that it's something that takes a little bit of time to really grow an audience and to, be successful in something like that. But I do understand how somebody in the content creator space or somebody who's a micro influencer can have some trouble when it comes to comparisons and being, all these other celebrities who are around them. Maybe they may feel like they have to compare themselves to them, which is something that they'll probably never be able to reach, but it doesn't make you any less of a person if you aren't on the same level career wise as somebody else. So I think mainly the main thing that most people have negative self talk is about probably either their relationship or their financial situation. So I would say that it's like what you said before, the whole shift of focus is very important. So I tend to usually shift my focus towards anything that's positive. I'll literally look for something positive just to kind of get my mind off of whatever negative thought I may have in my mind. But I can definitely see how it would be hard for the average person to do that, especially with all the negativity in the world and the media going around. So, but it's like you said before, it really just comes down to shifting focus and being willful and mindful enough to recognize when you are having these negative self thoughts. And once you do that, you'll be able to shift and focus on something more positive, because there's just as much positivity around as negativity. You just have to be willing to look for it.
I kind of heard two things and part of it is a comment. The first thing is in some situations, how we show up, maybe we're going to be more positive about that. Maybe we're going to be more affirming. Maybe we're going to have more confidence. So if we feel like we're a great employee and that we show up to work every day and that we're really good at our job, we may not have negative self-talk. That may be the positive stuff that we're embracing in terms of our spirit and how we're showing up. And then maybe like there's some other things that could be challenging, like sometimes in relationships with other people, intimate relationships, family relationships, friendships, those type of relationships. And maybe sometimes we might get triggered and stuff may come up with us, and then maybe we resort to maybe some negative self-talk. The second thing I kind of heard was that when you feel like your mind is going in a direction that is not positive, to try to see the light, to try to see something in it that is positive, although the whole experience might be challenging, might be difficult to go through, that you're still going to try to find like that one little nugget that you
Yeah.
can see that can lead you or keep you at least in a balanced state,
Yeah.
in some way. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really comes down to holding yourself accountable too, which may be hard for some people, but I think it is necessary to hold yourself accountable. So my next question would be, how can a person hold themselves accountable and not give into or listen to negative self-talks while also not being overly harsh with themselves? Because, I'll give an example. Sometimes, when I'm working out, I may have a certain amount of reps I want to do. And if I don't happen to hit that number of reps, then I may have to make it up the next day or something like that. So for me, that kind of helps me help myself become more accountable, but not being so harsh on myself when I don't hit that goal. So what would you recommend for somebody to not be so harsh with themselves in the negative self-talk they do have, but also work towards fixing whatever issue they may have?
and I get this comment, quite often as well, is I want to be accountable. I want to take responsibility for my behavior and how I show up and the things that I say. Um, there's a thin line between accountability and self-criticism, and making
Okay.
for sure like being accountable is great because that can move you towards health, that can move you towards success, that can move you towards positive thinking. Self-criticism is a way to tear down the inner core parts of yourself, and that's going to move you towards illness and disease. So holding oneself accountable may mean focusing on what you can do to improve. Maybe, while being overly harsh and tearing yourself down, maybe that is not going to help bring you to a place of movement in the right direction. I think of it sometimes like accountability is solution focused, and maybe self criticism is like a punishment. So that may be maybe what I would call mom's voice or dad's voice coming in, like that critical voice saying that I'm not good enough, versus someone saying like, oh, I made a mistake and this is what I can do differently. This is how I learned through the process. Another idea may be to making for sure you're setting realistic expectations. If you wake up one day and you feel motivated, and although maybe you haven't been doing push-ups, you're saying today I want to do 100 push-ups, that may not be the most realistic goal. So maybe the realistic goal is to start off with maybe how many you can do in a comfortable place. Maybe that's 5, and then gradually working up so that you can eventually get to that goal. And that goal, you can kind of achieve it in more progressive ways than just your mind saying, and giving up like I suck, now I can't do 100 push-ups, but versus maybe coming up with a different plan. So having more of a realistic way of achieving this. And I think we think about this, like you and I have had conversations about our podcast and kind of what direction we think our podcast wants to grow in. And do we have real expectations? Like, do we want 20,000 viewers? And what would it take? Is that going to happen overnight? Or are we setting ourselves up for, the likelihood of that happening overnight
Yeah.
is just not going to happen. But maybe over the course of a period of time, if we implement some clear kind of strategies, we'll get there. And then I also think about forgiveness, and I think we'll probably even maybe touch on this in the next episode. But how can we reframe forgiveness as like a form of responsibility? And how forgiveness is more about like releasing things within ourselves, and it can move
Yeah.
the inner voice from that self-critical perspective to that I'm still taking accountability for myself. And so I even think like with negative self-talk, when I've looked at different families and I look at the language within different families, you can see the pattern. So usually if there is a way that is communicated within the family, and that's in a way that is demeaning, negative, belittling, not acknowledging growth, high to extreme expectations. When those themes are present, you'll see them transmitted from generation to generation. And the very few families that I've seen where there was the expression, both verbal and physical expression of love, of interdependence, not independence, of I'm becoming successful, so only if we and everyone in the family is also successful. That theme you will see transmitted. I just don't see those patterns or that theme, those patterns transmitted as much as I see the bulk of families now in terms of how things are communicated. I mean, rarely do people say, I love you. And if they do, it's kind of like not provided with any other substance. So I love you because you are a really kind spirit, right? Or I love you because you show up in meaningful ways and are always wanting to engage in a conversation with me. So even really learning better communication, we can really transform these generational patterns. And I always say, if you are willing to do the work, and this is hard work because most people aren't willing to do it long term. They may dabble, they may put their toes in, get a little bit wet, and then they take a couple of steps back. And, that's fine too. But if you're willing to do the work, then that is part of the benefit, part of the big gift.
Okay.
The best present ever in life is that you then heal 7 generations before you and 7 generations into the future. If you can move the way that you communicate from negative self-talk to a more positive outlook, some people call it optimistic outlook. Some people call it a mindset, an exchange of energy. If I give off positive, I'm going to get back the same in return. Different theories from different frames describe it in their own way, and we're all talking about the same thing. If you're willing to do the work, then look how much you can contribute generationally. Like that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that is well worth considering. And I think that's a good reason why we have podcasts like this one, because we get to have these conversations and encourage people who may be, still on the fence on what direction they want to take. But hopefully after listening to this episode or any of the previous episodes, they'll be able to finally take the necessary steps and make that mindset shift required to start that healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a journey.
Let's maybe give some examples. Can you think of a thought that you've seen, maybe a common thought or something that maybe you've heard among friends or something like that as a common thought that's shared?
Yeah, sure. So let's say, for example, I mean, a lot of people are upset with, the cost of living and grocery prices and things like that. A lot of items that we buy that we consider necessities are, a lot more expensive than they have been in years past. So a lot of people may feel like it's somewhat their fault, like somehow it was something they didn't do right, or that they should have chose a different career path, or maybe even that they should do something that's not very smart and maybe even illegal just to, make ends meet. So I guess what I would say is, for the people who do have that thought process, it's always important to understand that there's things you can't control, and it wouldn't be something to be down on yourself about, but instead to focus more on what you can do and what you have control over, and try to figure out some extra ways. Maybe you have extra couple hours you can put towards something, and take actionable steps to actually fix the situation instead of just complaining about it, which is what a lot of people do. But I guess my question, I will ask you, what is your opinion on that?
So part of the reframe, well, at least part of the, so let's back up. Part of the negative self-talk that I heard was things are too expensive and I can't afford to live my lifestyle, something like that, right? Like it's too expensive and I don't have enough money. So the thought is it's too expensive and I don't have enough money. How can we move that thought around a little bit? So I'm going to give a couple of ideas, because things that sit with one person may not sit with the other person. And these are about having options, because this allows the mind to know that it is not linear, that I have to think one way, that I can have multiple ways of thinking about it. So one way is going to be, life is very expensive and I cannot afford it right now. Another way to think about that is, as I grow older, I am becoming more aware of how much things cost.
Okay.
As I'm getting older, I am becoming more aware where my attention is going. And part of that is drawing me into, I'm noticing how things are more expensive. Think about it. When you were 12, you didn't know how much electricity was. Now you know how much electricity is because you've gotten older and now you get to have that experience. So that could be another reframe. Another reframe may be, there is an abundance of free stuff out there, and I'm going to take a journey to find it. You can do something totally opposite. You could focus on what is free, not what is expensive, and keep your focus on what is free. Now I'm giving the opportunities to go back to using coupons or getting deals or searching for free stuff that's given away all the time. And maybe I create a list of free stuff. And that's where my energy goes. Instead of focusing on the what's not there, to focus on what's there. Another way to reframe it might be, it's amazing to be alive and conscious at this time, because I am participating in history. So looking at the overall theme of this statement. And at the end of the day, KJ, who controls that thought?
That would be the individual, the person, me, you, or whoever it is.
So I can control the thought that I think that things are expensive and I can't live there. Or I can control the thought, like I now have the opportunity to look for stuff that's free. or the opportunity to grow and see where my attention is going in terms of the economy. Like I can control that because it is my thought.
Mm. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
powerful. When we talk about power, power to control the mind and to control the thought. We're not talking hypnosis where someone is telling you how to think. I think what both you and I are talking to our audiences about is how to think, not what to
Mm.
think, that you have options to think about things. And if you
Mm.
go in one direction, know that there might be some side effects like depression, like anxiety. And if you
Mm.
go another direction, there might be some other side effects like freedom, liberation, satisfaction.
Mm.
And that we get to choose that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a powerful idea to have. And yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. So I guess I want to ask you, in your opinion, where do you think people how do people get depressed? Like what type of I know that sounds kind of strange to ask, but I was wondering if we could kind of help the audience understand the root cause of some of these issues, and maybe just based on your expertise, if you can kind of point out some of these root causes, like things you may not notice about yourself, if things you may be doing differently than normal. Are there anything that you've noticed in your career that people have in their life that leads to depression?
So, kind of two questions. What are the causes of depression? And then, how do I kind of know if I'm moving down that route of depression?
Yeah.
Um, and so, in a broad way, think about depression as it being on a spectrum. So, one of the differences in terms of knowing the difference between like something that brings on anxiety and something that brings on depression or a depressed state. Because we're not talking clinical diagnosis, we're talking about a depressed state, the way that maybe we may show up sometimes. Um, Anxiety comes when it's something about the future.
Mm-hmm.
Depression comes when it's something from the past. And so that's how you can kind of you can say,
Okay.
"Oh, I feel depressed because I thought I was going to get a job, but I didn't. But I thought that was in the past, but I didn't." Is that depression? Or I'm worried about this test that I'm going to take and I feel depressed. I'm
Mm.
worried about this test that I'm going to take and it's making me anxious. So that's how you kind of think about the future and the past. And when it comes to depression, there's a body of research in terms of the causes. There's stuff that can say that there are um, things that changes in terms of brain chemistry that leads one to depression. There's some genetic links that makes one more susceptible to a depressed state. You can have particular genes in your body. I have one of those genes that makes it someone more susceptible to a depressed state. Food, you could be having an allergic reaction and you could be in a depressed
Mm.
state. There's a current things going on in someone's life can lead you to a depressed state.
Okay.
Natural disasters can lead someone towards a depressed state. Um, Lack of spiritual connections, lack of spiritual grounding can lead someone to a depressed state. Invasions of the spirit, invasions of the mind, invasions of the body can lead to a depressed state. So there's a body of research, and I'm thinking of all the different types of forms of research that I read that could explain why people get in this depressed state. And then sometimes people feel like they're in a depressed state and it's a 10. Sometimes it's a 5. Sometimes they're at a 7 and they feel suicidal. So the experience of being depressed is different for each person. What are some of the things that you should notice?
Mm.
Take notice of changes. How do you feel? Are you more prone to eating healthy foods? If you're not, you might be in a depressed state.
Mm.
If you are choosing, and I'm making a bold statement, if you are choosing to eat fast food versus going home and eating organic salad, I'm going to say there's something there because of the choice that was made with that fast food. And most
Mm.
people will disagree with me. That's why I'm a psychotherapist, because I'm saying, well, then let's spend some time, let's talk about it, and let's see what drives that motivating factor to go to the fast food. Because a bear that was thriving would eat, it's in its natural habitat. They may not, unless they're starving or accustomed, accustomed to eating foods outside of their natural habitat, they would see it as probably poison. They would have some serious aversions to it. Most of the animals that we have interacting now are so accustomed to our food now that they've kind of adapted in some way.
Yeah.
But you will even see birds pass up maybe food on the roads and things like that. And
Yeah.
so notice subtle changes. Notice if you're having negative self-talk. If it is hard for you to say, I am great doing a podcast. I enjoy it. I feel good. I look good. I'm very confident. I'm articulate. If you have struggles saying good stuff about yourself, you might be heading towards a depressed state because self-criticism wants to show up for some reason. If you're struggling with weight, if you're struggling with any type of addiction, relationships, sex, drugs, alcohol, music, video games, you're going towards a depressed state. So that probably is what, 95% of the population right now that I've just said clearly on my podcast that most people are depressed. And there's a very small percentage of people who are going towards a healthy state. That is to say that when you make the decision that you don't want to be depressed, that you want to live a different type of life, you want excitement, you want fun, you want compassion, you want to love, you want to receive love, know that it is different because the people in our environments, it's like chaos.
Yeah.
And so you have to work. That's why I always encourage working with a trained professional, getting to know someone who is healthy, who is a part of the 10%. Let those be the people you follow. Let those be the books you read. Let that become your news, because that's where you want to go. And you have to filter everything out, at least for a time being, so that you can have some separation and see things for the truth, because we have all been disillusioned and we have all been hypnotized.
Yes, that is so true and so insightful. I think that's a good place. We could leave it there for now. But I want to thank you yet again for your insights on today's episode. And is there any information you want to leave the audience with before we close out?
I will be sharing some links later on. I'm doing a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, so do follow me. I'm the Holistic Clinician on YouTube and also on Instagram and major other kind of social media platforms.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to today's episode. Make sure if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Until next time, everyone, be safe and bye-bye.
Wraps up another episode. I hope today's discussion provided clarity and tools you can use in your daily life. If you're ready to take the next step in the healing journey, I'd love to connect. Head over to my website to schedule a free 15-minute consultation. It is a great opportunity to ask questions and see how we can work together. And while you're there, download my complimentary workbook designed to help you reflect, grow, and move towards mental wellness, happiness, and success. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. The rhythm of healing, the Octaves method. O is for observation. Through stillness we find meditation and breath work that quiet the mind. In silence we listen, the answers are clear. Awareness emerges, dissolving the fear. C is for compassion, for self and for all, embracing the good, the struggles, the fall. With kindness we grow, we nurture, we mend, learning to love ourselves as we extend. T is for therapy, a path we explore. Daily we practice unlocking the door. From journaling to mindfulness, healing begins. Each step is a victory as peace settles in. A is for animals and laughter so bright, like children at play, their joy taking flight. With playfulness and movement, we rediscover the way to heal through the fun that we often delay. V is for victuals, nourishing and pure, detoxifying the body and keeping us sure. We choose what we eat with intention and grace, fueling our journey at our own pace. E is for exercise, where movement is free. We stretch and we bend in sweet harmony. Flexibility grows with choices we make. In strength and in stillness, our bodies awake. S is for socialize, where self-growth begins. Others reflect our triggers and the places within. Through relationships, our true selves we find, growing and healing with each tie that binds. The Octaves method, where all behavior makes sense. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents. We just need to find the sense it presents.